talking about stories that sometimes aren't told, or don't know how to tell, or there's stories that need to be brought out. And that's what's really important. And we're really focusing on the user in this aspect and where mixed reality makes a difference and pulling that story out to show where innovation can happen. We're going to have 3 talkers, 1 virtual and 2 real. I'm an experienced designer, worked with mega theme parks, worked with people in innovation and as a design research director. And then there's Matt Johnston from Human Factors, and then Janet Whiteside, who's a speech pathologist and runs the Aphasia House. And we represent different aspects of the innovation process in the cycle. So a lot of times mixed reality has been innovating experiential storytelling, and this is where our focus is. Because experiential storytelling tells a lot broader, a lot deeper story about who we are and how we function. And when we work with mixed reality, which we've been doing for hundreds of years, by the way, it's not just the 90s, it's been making the experience more immersed, more interactive, more intense, more extreme, full sensory, and using this combination of story, play, and game has been really riveting, getting more and more so, especially in the last decade or 2. And one of the things that we were asking is, can mixed reality and entertainment do things more than just amuse us? Can that power to go beyond its a pastime? And so one of the things that I did after working with Universal Studios is started a media convergence laboratory at UCF and really looked at different ways that we can take mixed reality and figure out how to prepare a life for a teacher, inspire a life for a student, enhance a life of a soldier, save a life by a surgeon's training, and all these aspects, and really kind of find these models, examples, or what I call a prototype, which is really kind of getting into, and what from entertainment we play test. We see, what does the user do? What is the user telling us? What is their story? What do they need? How do we solve that problem? Not just putting on any old technology to make it work. And this is one of the challenges, because we were able to show that the technology worked. We could show that it solved a problem. But for their adoption was the big issue. And this is the story that needs to be told and need to be told by the user. And this is one of the focuses that we want to look at, is how to use mixed reality to bring that story of the user out, to really know where innovation needs to be. Now, stories have been working with innovation quite a bit with science fiction. They've been showing us all these things, and we've been kind of seeing them and say, I want that. I want all those kind of things, and eventually they come about, you know. And some of these things that used to be future are now retro. And the issue is, once they're here, it's so what? And it's called the surprisingly obvious about innovation. Before it's an innovation, we don't get it. And when it's adopted, then it's old hat. And then we need to get to where it solves the problem. So what? And this gap between, you know, we've all seen the Gartner's hype curve and the spark of the trigger of technology, the hype, a lot of this with the movies, creating that and working with this valley of disillusionment, which is really saying, it's not the technology, stupid. It's solving a problem. That's where the demand's going to happen. That's where the innovation is going to happen. But not for long, because it's going to go into an inevitable obsolescence. And so that's a virtual reality. Where does the AR and mixed reality come into? Well, let's take a look at Joffrey's Moore crossing the chasm with the other graph, and we still have that gap there. But here, at least they have the inevitable obsolescence, that you better get it in there before it becomes obsolete. But is there a way that we can fill that gap, bridge that gap, and really kind of look at that? And where we need to is we need to bring that demand closer to the invention. And we need to not just answer, does it work? We need to say, does it solve a problem, and how does it fit in? These are the 3 areas of validation we really need to, and we need that story from the user's point of view to do that. And from that user story, we're looking at this conversation between the functional aspect of the technology and the purpose of the human, and we need to know how that matches up. And one of the good examples is an early example we did with mixed reality in the Canon mixed reality headset is traumatic brain injury rehabilitation. The problem is they had no working memory. So they couldn't get new memories and couldn't learn. And so they had generic kitchens in the clinics, but that was a physical kitchen. And they couldn't learn a new kitchen. You could build it in virtual reality and go in Second Life, but you have to learn a new interface. They can't learn a new interface. We can go into a cave and be immersive and use natural gestures, but the virtual is separate from the real. It's immersive, but not truly interactive. And then you can have the head mount and data gloves and all this other stuff, but once you get into virtual reality, we get into a problem of we lose the reality. The reality is where the therapist is. And what we were able to do is look with mixed reality, get this perception of the real kitchen, the procedure of the live interaction between the therapist and the presence of the real world, and work with procedural knowledge and work in the subconscious with real objects and get that full experience. Suddenly we had a solution, and we were able to kind of get this aspect. And this is a video of Janet talking where this is our client. This is the person who's working with these. But it's not, the auto's not working. So I can say what she's saying, and we can go a little faster. But basically what happened is that she can't work in virtual reality. And once mixed reality came,
in which we had a participant that had frontal lobe damage, and his main issue was that he could not remember where things were in his own home. So that when he got up in the morning, every time he went to the kitchen, it was like a totally new environment for him. I think in a mixed reality environment for our client, the multi-sensory experience was important for him. I think it was important for him to smell the bagel that he was preparing. I think it was important for him to sense putting on that cream cheese, for him to feel the coldness of that refrigerator. I think it was also very important. I was actually with him when he was in that environment. And I think that that human element was important to guide him, to cue him what was essential.
So I'm going to cut that short, but the data that came by was very important to understand what that solution was, what's going to follow with him at home. The mixed reality wasn't going to go home with him. The mixed reality didn't solve the problem or do the training. The mixed reality brought us data to understand where that is. We'll have to take the full 15 minutes and leave the questions to the end. We can't kind of work with that. Okay? Great, thanks. But we'll get there. And sorry for the interruption. So the issue is that data showed us that we had answered questions we forgot to ask. By getting a full capture of that experience and analyzing that data in what we call the human experience modeling, we were able to find a solution that went home with him, which was as easy as a piece of paper, and be able to get them back home and then transfer that training, which was huge in mental health, because that's the most difficult thing to do. And so what we want to do is add that to some of the industrial training in other areas that we go into other phases. Matt?
So I get to come at this from a completely different perspective. I see the technology that's out here at the Expo as an absolute conduit for the individual to be able to tell a story that they're just simply unable to tell. The interesting thing about what the aphasia piece that you got to see in the world that I get to live in, which is manufacturing training and military training every day, is that all of these people are performing in a time, in an area that's defined by time, behavior, and space, and allows me to capture their performance in a way that I just couldn't before. I've been on the manufacturing floor, and I've been sitting there talking to these people in their context, listening to them tell me about what they do every day and how they do that. And there was one example, I was sitting there, I had the standing operating procedure sitting there in my hand. And I said, so in this particular case, your job is to combine these two pieces of paper with glue. And they turn this valve, and all this steam purges out. And the standard operating procedure says when it's done purging that steam, turn that valve to the left. So I asked an obvious question, something that was obvious to me. Sorry. Well, how do you know when it's done purging? And the person said, well, you see that exit sign that's up there on the wall? That, when I can read the X, that tells me when I have to turn it to the left. And I turned to the engineer and I said, so you're designing this machine. I bet you had no idea that that was the visual cue that this person in this environment was using. What they were using in order to understand from their environment, from their world, how to actually perform this. It's certainly not written on that standard operating procedure. All right, so there are these challenges, these problems that are existing out there right now that unless you engage that person in a collaborative exercise, you're completely unable to understand the problem that that person is, would otherwise be able to explain. Without me being in that context, if we were in a virtual environment, I never would have been able to get that conversation started to allow that individual to tell the story to the engineer. Of course, that engineer being somebody who's working in a headquarters 1,000 miles away, designing something in a CAD station that they're not engaging that individual in. They just don't have the ability to share that. The engineer needs to elicit that story from the individual that's in the manufacturing environment, and that consumer is desperately wanting to tell that story because at the end of the day, they're the one who is actually going to be consuming the ultimate solution that's coming down.
Audio?
There's no...
Disease, it can be trauma, it can be a tumor. Story is so critical to what we do as a speech-language pathologist. And I think when we take story out of what we do, all it is drill and practice. And in the midst of that, like you said, if the therapist is in there with you, I can be feeding you some language to augment, to help you.
Right.
But you're telling the story. It's your story.
Right.
I don't believe virtual reality can do that because I believe the element of relationship isn't there. And I believe that for the person with aphasia, that interconnection with another human being is extremely important for them.
It's really cool.
It is
It's
cool.
really
isn't
cool
it?
to see because you can see behind you. There's really cool stuff back there.
What is behind there? What are you seeing?
I see you,
Mm-hmm.
and I see where a lot of the trees and snapgrass
Okay.
right there,
Mm-hmm.
and a couple. Here's a big one,
Mm-hmm.
a really nice big one.
But think how much more enriching it is if it's connected to a story, and particularly your story, what you want to be talking about. Then those 20 words are your words, and it's telling your story. Let's say you put on that head-mounted device, and it was as if you were at a construction scene.
Right. Oh.
And you could tell me what you were doing at that construction
Oh, yeah, I
scene.
could say that. I could do it.
You could do it.
Yeah, I could do it. Yes.
You could do it.
Yeah, I could.
Once one of them put on the head-mounted device and saw where he was, all of a sudden his sentence structure became normal, which was very surprising.
So too often we believe that the technology is the solution. That the moment that we believe that we have something that works, we're ready to diffuse this into the marketplace because we believe we've got something that's cheaper, that's better, that's faster. But what we're forgetting about is the human impact. The fact that if I can take meaning from how somebody uses this, infuse this into their workflow, demonstrate that it actually does solve this problem, can save somebody time and money, then I can fit it into their operational environment, and ultimately that's what gives me the measurable results that will allow me to diffuse this. I'm actually able to bridge through that storytelling exercise what the engineer needs to be able to hear from an individual who otherwise would have the inability to be able to explain that, whether it's in a mental health application or whether it's on the manufacturing floor. So what we need here is in this particular case, the training prototype allows us to put these people into context. One of the things that was critical within what you saw with the mental health prototype is when the gentleman said, "I see you." Well, why is that any different than the manufacturing floor when an individual says, "I see you, the engineer. I see the environment that I'm in. All these things that are changing around me are going to change the way that I behave and I perform within this time and within this space, but I need to see this environment." We're emotional beings, right? We all respond differently to the stress that's around us, and we can measure how that performance is. But if I don't do it within their context, I'm going to lose something. I'm going to lose the meaning behind the data that's coming out. In a virtual environment, I just simply have the inability to be able to measure what otherwise I could have in the context. The information that I'm gleaning from it is going to be completely devoid about the contextual or the information that's around them, the cues that are coming from that individual's environment. Right? So the way that this typically works today, when change actually happens, you've got this engineer who's sitting in a headquarters somewhere, developing using these fantastic CAD models, these tools, the next generation, this next piece of equipment. However, the individual who's going to use it, the person who's going to consume this information, is 1,000 miles away at a plant. And the day that that thing is going to launch, or maybe the day before or the week before, they take that person, they pluck them out of their context, and they put them in a conference room. All right? And they give them a PowerPoint presentation. And they say, look at these wonderful things that's going to change our productivity and increase our quality and all these wonderful things. This great peak of heightened expectations is happening. And at the moment that they launch, inevitably what ends up happening here is we have this drop in productivity, this increase in waste, this decrease in quality. And they're wondering why. All right? Well, we haven't really prepared these people because we've taken them out of context. We've done it in a way we haven't been able to actually engage this person in this collaborative design exercise. We've been unable to realize the anticipated gains. When this all started, the engineers had these grand designs of increasing productivity and doing something great for the company, but yet if our goal was only to get this person up to speed and actually train them to the point where we achieve pre-production levels or pre-implementation levels, then we've actually missed out on the point that we actually have these gains that we could actually make if we actually collaborated with each other, understood their performance, took some meaning from this data, if we were able to do that in context. And I believe that the mixed reality actually is a conduit for us to be able to tell those stories and engage people in that ability. Sorry.
So mitigating this disruption, that's the key, that's the holy grail, is the huge amount lost in transition, and you can bring the mixed reality into the design and process. I can't read that.
You're past 15 minutes.
Okay, great. Let me just kind of follow up. So we're dealing with all aspects and all facets of this, the perception, presence, procedure, and performance. And we just wish to thank Canon for supporting our research over the last 10 years. It's been amazing work with the technology and with the professionals we've been dealing with. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris and Matt.